406. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chewie. This is the 411 from 406, and I am joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing tonight?
I'm awesome. I am excited, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit nervous.
What are you nervous about? What's on your mind? I mean, what are you so excited about tonight?
Well, you know what? For the listeners that have listened to kind of my little teaser, which was the last episode on the podcast feed, we are doing a deep dive this evening into. We're going to start a deep dive into the Star Wars sequel trilogy. So and this evening we're talking about the Force Awakens. I think when we started this podcast, I think this is the sort of thing that I kind of envisioned, right? It was two kind of nerdy, geeky guys talking and really kind of delving in and really doing more than just a review, right? Because there's been a 1,001 reviews done of these movies, but really just kind of what these films meant to us, what we thought about them, what we think about them now, what our kids think about them, those kind of things. I'm not quite sure where this is going to go, but I'm excited. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, same here. This is this is something I've been looking forward to for a while now, and the thing that I'm really interested in trying to pulling out of each other in this particular podcast is to understand, like, these, to your point, like, a lot of people have given plenty of reviews on these movies before, but we're sort of taking the perspective of how do we feel, in this case, 6 years after the fact, like how did to try to remember back to how we felt when we saw the movie originally, but also kind of talk about how it's marinated since then and how we feel about it, because we're, if this goes as I hope it does, we'll do this for the subsequent two films as well, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. And it'll be really interesting after all is said and done to kind of take a look back and say, all right, well, how do we ultimately feel about this? And I feel like our opinions matter as much as anybody else, right? Because we were kind of one of the target audiences for this group. We grew up with this stuff, literally. And to have these sequels come out so many years later, but be older and wiser and have different perspectives on the world, it's interesting to see how this impacted us now versus how it did then. So I think it's going to be an interesting exercise for sure.
For sure. All right. Well, I guess why don't we just kind of dive right in then? So I guess we'll talk just real briefly about the kind of Star Wars, right? The saga that really kind of needs no introduction. Star Wars for me, and I imagine it was for you, was just kind of always there, right? I remember it. It was by far the biggest movie franchise of my childhood. I was born in 76. Star Wars, the original, came out just a couple of years later, so I obviously didn't see it in the theaters. But I just always remember Star Wars. When I was on the playground, I was always playing. I was Han Solo, I was Luke Skywalker. It was always the Millennium Falcon. I think I probably have the most vivid memories of Empire and Jedi, just because I was a little bit older when those came out. I don't even think I saw Empire. I might have seen it in a re-release. I remember very vividly seeing Jedi in the theater, kind of in its first run. And obviously, there's a huge kind of twist in that one. No, I take that back, in Empire. But seeing Darth Vader for who he was in Jedi and kind of how he died and all that kind of stuff. Spoiler alert from a 1983 movie. Darth Vader did die. But it was always there, and I always ranked everything else that I saw or experienced up against Star Wars in some way, shape, or form. It was kind of, that was the measuring stick. I don't know. What are you kind of in the same boat there?
Oh yeah, 100%. So similar, because you're about 2 months apart in age. So I had virtually the same experience in that I don't remember if I saw Empire in the theaters when I was young. I don't think that I did, but I definitely saw Return of the Jedi, and I do have a memory of it being very close to my birthday and being so excited. And my parents taking me out to dinner at a restaurant that was right by a movie theater, and I could see the marquee that said Return of the Jedi outside of the window. I was eating, and they didn't tell me that they were taking me, so I was really excited about it. And I do have the dubious honor of being able to say that I have seen all the original trilogy in the theaters. My father, when I was it would have been 1986. It would have been the 10th anniversary of Star Wars. They actually had a special event where they played all three movies back to back. And my dad pulled me out of school. I think I was in like third grade at the time. He shows up to school. He pulls me out of school without me even knowing it, and doesn't tell me where we're going. And we proceed to sit in a movie theater for the next 6 hours and watch all three movies. And it was the first time, I'll never forget this. It was the first time that I was at a movie that when the good guy came on the screen for the first time, like the crowd just erupted and they cheered. And when Darth Vader came on the screen, everybody would boo. And it was such an exciting atmosphere and such a cool experience that, I'll definitely never forget that. But I mean, for me, Star Wars growing up was certainly watching the movies, but it was also the toys. It was all about the toys. Lucas absolutely had everything set up properly. I mean, he was big on the merchandising aspect of everything, and I will never forget. I mean, whether they were my toys or the neighbor kids' toys or whatever, like we all played with them together, having the Millennium Falcon, having all the vehicles, all the characters. I still have them in my basement. That to me, it was just like, it was such an amazing memory growing up. And on top of that, like that's when I was growing up, there was, I suppose as every young child does, you do a lot of daydreaming, right? And what I wanted to do is I wanted to be Luke Skywalker, and I wanted to be whisked away to fight an evil empire and learn the ways of the Force and have a lightsaber and all that stuff. Like that's what I wanted to do as a kid. That was just, it inspired so much imagination and creativity. And I honestly, I do feel bad for anybody who didn't grow up in that generation, just because they missed out on something so incredibly special. And that was definitely the Star Wars original trilogy as we know it.
Yeah, I would agree. For me, the lightsaber was always my thing. I always wanted to be Han Solo, and I remember having a hard time reconciling in my mind the fact that my favorite character never used my favorite weapon, right? So,
Yes.
and so I always had a hard time playing that character, but I always managed to find a way to, steal a lightsaber or do something. And so I was able to kind of use a lightsaber on the playground, which was always cool. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think the first time I ever saw Star Wars in the theater might have been with you in Bloomington at the when they did the special edition.
Oh, wow.
I don't know that I ever saw the original film I clearly I'd seen it probably 1,000 times on, home video by then, but I don't know that I ever saw that movie. And I remember that like it was yesterday. That was, we either skipped the final or it was right after a final, and we went and we stood in line. And then, that was those special editions.
Yeah.
Came out in what, 90, what was that, 96 maybe?
Yeah, mid to late 90s. Yeah, right before,
like that,
I want to say they this was before DVD even, right? I think definitely before they were even out on DVD. Because I remember they had that 3 cassette. It was like that gold and black sort of sleeved VHS
which I still have in my basement. And you're right, because I bought the Phantom Menace on VHS.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first copy of that, was on VHS.
Same. Yeah.
So and so I guess this particular trilogy is interesting to me because it's not we've been talking a lot about the original trilogy, And so after Jedi was over, there was a huge gap, right? Like we just really never thought there would be any Star Wars ever after 1983, and it was all the way until what, 1999, when the prequel trilogy came out. And we will talk about the prequel trilogy, I imagine, at some point. But I wanted to touch on it here because it, even though it is in the Star Wars universe and it is part of the quote Skywalker saga, those films to me are still very different in that they're not really about the this is going to sound weird. They're not really about the characters that we know and love, even though they are about Anakin Skywalker. They're not Luke, they're not Han, they're not Chewie. They're, yes, C-3PO and R2 make appearances, but they're different. This sequel trilogy that we're talking about are about those characters, very much about Han and Luke and Leia and Chewie, and so I think it's, at least to me, as a 40-something-year-old guy, this sequel trilogy, I think is I don't even want to say it's better, but it's just more special to me because it's my part of the story. Does that make sense, or am I kind of babbling?
No, absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head, because I remember when the prequels got announced, and we were, rightfully really excited about it because it was an opportunity to see what they could do with the Star Wars universe with modern day special effects as it was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And as much as I was excited about those movies, when they were all over, to me, they almost felt more like extended universe stories, just because with cameos by R2 and 3PO, right? Because which they're not. I mean, they're certainly canon and they're part of the overall story. But we grew up with Luke, Han, and Leia, the holy trinity of the good guys in the
Right.
Star Wars saga, and none of those characters had any place in this particular part of the universe, because obviously it took place so far before that. So when the sequels were announced, it was a whole different ball game, because this was a continuation of what we knew and love and grew up with. But the prequels were what they were, but it certainly wasn't. It didn't satiate in the same way. It didn't. I don't know how to say it, but I think if you grew up with Star Wars and you loved it as much as we did, yeah, we'd love to hear the backstory. We'd love to hear all kinds of stories in terms of how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. But the real meat behind, I think, what we all wanted was where did our favorite characters go from there? What was their story after we left them back in 1983?
Yeah, and I think, I think it's. I was, to your point, I was very excited when the Phantom Menace was announced. I can remember just really geeking out when I saw that original trailer, right? Because that was the first Star Wars we had in over a decade, and it was Star Wars that we literally never thought was coming. That being said, I think I was more excited when I saw the trailer and the buzz for The Force Awakens. I remember they released a teaser trailer like right around Thanksgiving, about a year before it came out, or maybe it was on Thanksgiving Day or the day out. It was very close, and there was very little in that trailer, but they started showing things, and it this is going to sound weird, but it felt like a Star Wars movie. It felt like it was back in that universe. And I think, to your point, and we can delve into it at some time, but there's a lot of reasons why those prequels, in my mind, don't feel like Star Wars movies, right? There's a lot of CGI. They did a lot of things. There's a lot of different environments, a lot of different characters. And to me, they just never felt right. And when J.J. Abrams was brought on, I think he was, he's a guy about our age, and clearly has a love for this universe. And he really made a big point in bringing it back to making it based in reality. So he did a lot, there's clearly CGI in these movies, there's a lot more puppetry. There's a lot more practical effects. And in fact, there's even, I seem to remember there's even like a 3 or 4 minute vignette where he even talks about that, right? And he's clearly like ripping on the prequels, being like, actual effects, practical effects, real, and it's very easy to see the care that he took to make it feel like a Star Wars film. I'm babbling. I think you know what I mean, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely going to talk about that. There are going to be, as I walk through kind of the different scenes of the movie, we're going to talk about some of the differences that I think really made this movie stand out from the prequels. And you're going to be able to tell, like, almost immediately from the beginning, like they have put a lot of effort into the practical effects. And that, to me, as soon as I heard that, I was very interested. And as soon as I saw it, it made all the difference in the world, because there was so much green screen background CGI stuff in the prequels. And there were so many things that seemed like they were animated just because they could be. Whereas in this movie, like in the beginning scene, you see stormtroopers flying around, but they're clearly on wires. Like, that's happening. Like, it's
Right.
You're seeing that
Right.
happen. And that makes a big difference. And that was, like, our kids will grow up and they'll watch Star Wars and they'll be like, well, that looks fake, or that looks stupid. But when we grew up, like, it meant something, because that was the best we had at the time. And so what happens as a result of that is it develops a certain amount of charm after a while, right? Like, it's endearing to see these practical effects now, because they harken more back to, the early days when that's all they had to be able to showcase.
Okay, so this film was released in December of 2015. I can remember very vividly. I went on opening night, and what I don't remember is whether you saw it first or I did. But
We
I
were
know
like
that
an
we
hour
talked.
apart, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't remember which way. I think I might have been an hour ahead of you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I remember my kind of initial reaction was, just the first night that I saw it, I was just blown away. I was like, this feels right. This, I hadn't, at that point, I hadn't had a chance to kind of sit down and take notes and watch it multiple times and pick through it, and it felt like a Star Wars movie. It felt comfortable. It felt like a continuation of the story. It felt, it just felt right, and it gave me a feeling that the prequel trilogy never did. It just, those movies were enjoyable, some more than others, but this movie specifically, walking out of that theater, I was satisfied. I was clearly, I was played to as a specific target audience, and I imagine we'll talk about a lot of those things. There was plenty of quote Easter eggs to kind of wet my whistle. The story, I thought, was compelling. Yeah, it felt right. It felt like I was back in the Star Wars universe for the first time since Return of the Jedi. Really, it felt like a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, we'll certainly get through it as we talk through some of this, but I think the biggest compliment that I can give this movie is that it didn't disappoint. And I know that sounds like sort of a milk toast flavored compliment, but for me, as soon as they announced that they were going to do this trilogy, I was thinking to myself, oh my God, what if they suck? What if they
Yeah.
do this wrong, right? Because I think the prequels to many people were underwhelming, or didn't meet expectations, is probably a better way to put it. And I just didn't even see it possible in this day and age for them to make a sequel of a movie that came out 1983 would have been how many years ago? Is it like 32 years after? I'm not doing my math right. From 83 to 2015. I mean, so many years after that. I mean, they don't make
32 years. Yeah.
They don't make good sequels to movies that were made that long ago. It just doesn't happen. And then when you consider it's Star Wars, like, what could possibly have bigger expectations than the original trilogy, which created a cultural phenomenon? I mean, the idea that I came out of that movie and I wasn't upset by the way it was handled, or I wasn't disappointed, was the biggest compliment I could have given it, because I sort of had the bar set low. I'm like, I saw the prequels, and I was pessimistic about it, but I was so pleasantly surprised and excited. Like I was back, in the universe. I felt like I was 7 years old again, and I was watching
Yeah.
these movies, and I wanted to go buy toys, and I wanted to get the DVD and watch it 6 times through. And I was elated. I was so happy about it.
Good. Yeah. So it sounds like we had very similar experiences then, certainly on opening night. So let's get into kind of, I don't know that we're going to necessarily do a review per se, but it sounds like we're going to kind of talk through some specifics, and let's really kind of explore, did we enjoy it as much as we think we enjoyed it?
Yeah, that's going to be the real, how is it aged? Is it a fine wine, or is it molded over a little bit? And so, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the opportunity to kind of step through some of the, well, not really some, pretty much all of the scenes of the movie. It's not going to be frame for frame by any means, but I'm going to try to talk through this. And I want to, highlight some of the things that I really liked about what happened. Some of the things, there were definitely things that I didn't like as well. I'm not going to be a complete fanboy and stick up for some of the things that definitely didn't make sense. But I definitely want to get your perspective on some of this as I'm going through it, because there were things that I liked and things that I didn't, and maybe even things that I still have questions about that I'm still not sure were ever really answered. And I think, hopefully between the two of us, we can figure that out. So,
Sure.
I guess I'll kick things off. So, as with any other Star Wars saga movie, we start with a scroll, and we learn a couple things from the scroll. We learn that the First Order is basically the quote unquote new empire, and shortly after the scroll, we get transported to a carrier ship, which is on its way to this new planet that we will learn is the planet Jakku, where we're introduced to 4 of the new main characters. We've got Poe, we've got FN-2187, who is going to be known as Finn, we have Kylo Ren, and we have BB-8. And we can tell, right from the beginning of this movie, this is going to be a big talking point, and this is also going to end up being one of the biggest criticisms of the movie, not necessarily specifically for me, but from the masses. There are a lot of similar beats to A New Hope. So in a sense, this is almost an exact reboot of Episode 4 in a lot of senses, and we'll get into a lot of the parallels there. So we get to Jakku. We see that Poe is talking, and we learn from Poe that Luke Skywalker is essentially going to be the MacGuffin of this movie. We're not going to find out till the end of the movie that he's not even going to be in it, and he doesn't have a single line in the movie. But he's essentially the plot point, and he's the driving factor. He's the MacGuffin. He's what we're pushing to try to get to. Both the good guys and the bad guys are trying to make their way to him. And that we also learn that Kylo Ren has some family ties that we're supposed to care about. So Max von Sydow, if that's how you pronounce his name, he's a great actor from a lot of movies like The Exorcist and many others. Has a really great short scene in this movie. I kind of wished he had a bigger part. But shortly after that conversation takes place, the mood changes, and it gets pretty dark pretty quick. And then we get into some pretty intense action scenes, and right from the get-go, the first thing I notice is that this is a different kind of Star Wars movie. Like it felt like Star Wars, and it definitely looked like Star Wars, but it was a different kind of movie. And I'm curious to know what you thought. As this movie's starting, and these First Order troopers are landing, and they're shooting everything up, and these action scenes, to me, like, I can see a lot of the practical effects. I can see the stormtroopers getting pulled around on wires, and a lot of the explosions and things, which are clearly not graphically, well, maybe they're graphically enhanced, but they're not CG. But as this action is starting to unfold, like, where's your mind with this? Like, how do you feel about what you're seeing?
It's funny because the opening, and let me take a step back. You touched on the fact that there's one of the biggest kind of knocks on this movie is that it is almost a kind of reboot or a retelling of A New Hope. I actually didn't pick up on that until, like, I certainly didn't pick up on it while I was watching it the first time. like it never even crossed my mind until I read about it somewhere on the internet, and I was just like, nah, that's not that. And then I was like,
Sure.
oh shit, yeah, that there actually is a lot of similarities. That being said, you know, the first scene of Star Wars of A New Hope is actually a pretty brutal scene when you really think about it, right? It's stormtroopers attack, coming aboard and just kind of firing away. I never really, I never really kind of understood. Not that I didn't understand it, but I never really kind of internalized that until I saw this scene. You're right. This is a pretty brutal scene right out of the gate. It's a very it's putting the war in Star Wars, right? I mean, it's very violent. It
It's
is,
dark. It almost feels like a
yeah.
horror movie, to be honest with you. Like
It does, yeah,
when Poe and I don't remember Max von Sydow's character's name, but when they're sitting in there talking, and BB-8 comes rushing in, and then they look out in the horizon and they see these troopers coming in, it's a little creepy. Like I remember feeling a little anxiety right out of the gate as I'm seeing this
yeah,
happen. I'm like, oh crap, something really bad's getting ready to happen, and
yeah.
it got me charged.
Yeah, and they do a really good job here with the score. The score is dark and deep, and it's clearly a Star Wars score, but the score is it's perfect for this particular scene. I will admit I wasn't overly jazzed, for lack of a better term, with the appearance of Kylo Ren initially. He looked like he kind of looked like a knockoff Darth Vader, right? Which there's a lot of truth to that for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons that we will get into. I will say Kylo Ren ended up being one of my favorite characters when you take his entire arc into consideration. We're not really gonna talk about that tonight, but he ended up being one of my favorite characters in this sequel trilogy. But no, I mean this whole first scene on Jakku, the thing that kind of stood out to me, aside from the real kind of darkness, I really liked Poe Dameron, and I wasn't quite sure why, but I think it was because he brought a little bit of levity to this scene that really wasn't even in the original trilogy. There was very little what I would consider comedy in that original trilogy, like in the entire thing, and even in Poe's and like where they introduce him and he's kind of brought in front of Kylo Ren, and he makes some quip about who talks first. Do you talk first? Do I talk? And it just kind of breaks that tension a little bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I liked it. He's one of the characters that as we move forward, and even forward past the sequel trilogies, if I'm interested to see kind of where his particular story goes, because I don't think they did a great job in flushing out. They didn't give me enough Poe for me, not necessarily in this movie, but just kind of in the entire 3-movie arc. But no, I'm loving it. I'm all like right now, I'm all in, 100%.
Yeah. And I agree with your commentary on Poe. I think that he's immediately intriguing. I mean, I think what they're telling us from this beginning scene is that he's the new Han Solo. He's this
Absolutely.
trilogy's Han Solo, because he's got this 70s suave, good look, long hair thing about him. He's got cheeky dialogue like that. Like they're clearly setting the stage for him to sort of be, he's the pilot, he's the guy that can shoot, he's all these things. So I think that sort of maybe subconsciously endears us to him right away, because we all love Han Solo. And to this day, when I watch this movie, I never stop rooting for him to get into that X-Wing and fly away before the First Order gets there. I keep thinking, oh man, if he just does this thing just a little bit faster. And I don't know, like if you ever have that experience with this movie or any other movie where you're watching the scene and you know exactly what's going to happen and it can't ever be different. But you're like, oh man, come on, just go, like in hopes that something will change, but it never does.
For sure.
So yeah, I agree. Like this opening scene really sets the stage in a great way, and I'm super excited about where this is going, and I'm all in. I'm 100% focused on this. And then we see, so he gives something to BB-8, and BB-8 escapes while Kylo ends up taking Poe away for interrogation. And I think one of the now would probably be a good time to pause and really appreciate, as we're talking about practical effects, how amazing BB-8 is as a character in this movie. And I mean, I don't know, is he the best droid of this trilogy? I mean, does any other droid
Oh,
have a bigger impact in this entire trilogy, especially this movie, than BB-8?
no, no. I mean, hands down, he is the R2D2 of this trilogy, like 100%. There are some other droids that appear and are and even play some pretty good roles, but no, nothing remotely close. Nothing stands up to BB-8. You know what? I can make an argument that BB-8 has more of a quote personality, and I might even like his personality more than R2. You know,
Certainly in this new trilogy, that's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. But I think if you're ranking droids of the Star Wars universe, I think you probably got to put R2 as number one, but BB-8 is right there.
It's tough, man. I mean, we'll get there, but R2 didn't get a lot of love in this trilogy, and it's a little. I mean, maybe they were just making room for BB-8 and trying to sell more toys, which is certainly understandable. But I don't know if R2 pissed off a producer or got on Kathleen Kennedy's bad side, but he got the short end of the stick for this entire trilogy, in my opinion. But it is what it is. But I think it's good that it carved the way for BB-8, which I think I remember seeing trailers and seeing him in the trailers and thinking, oh, great, they're just trying to shove some other droid in there. But I mean, he's it's 100% practical, like that, like BB-8 actually works. Like it's not a CGI thing. And that in itself is truly amazing that it works so well, not just functionally, but on the screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great character.
So we cut from this right to the scene of a scavenger who's looting parts off an old Star Destroyer, and we end up meeting Rey for the first time. And I guess I'll kick it to you. What sort of first impressions did you have of Rey in this first scene as you're seeing her kind of spelunk her way through these old decrepit Star Destroyers?
I didn't quite know what to make of Rey. The first time as I was watching this, I was still in awe of the environment, right? The scenery, the fact that she was inside a Star Destroyer or inside an AT-AT or these kind of things. I was still trying to kind of wrap my head around where this was and when this was and how it fit into the Star Wars that I knew. And what was this planet, and where is Jakku? Is it Tatooine? Is it it clearly looks like Tatooine, those kind of things.
We didn't know it wasn't Tatooine at that point, because
Right.
they didn't name
Right.
Jakku at that. I don't think
Right.
at that part of the movie.
Yeah. So I was still trying to kind of wrap my mind around that. And yeah, and it's a while before we kind of learn who Rey is or what she's about or those kind of things. So I didn't really have a whole lot of an opinion about Rey at this point. It was more of in awe of the environment still.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So we didn't really get much about her at this point, because she didn't even talk for a little while longer. But my first impressions were that, first of all, I love it may be my favorite new theme that John Williams created for the entire Star Wars trilogy. I think her theme is fantastic. It's very it's interesting. It's really childlike, I think, which is kind of what we see, going back. So as I'm watching this movie again, because I think you and I both watched it in preparation for this, she seems so much younger in this movie, and she seems so much more innocent and more childlike. That is really telling as part of this. But to your point, and I'm glad you said this, because this is exactly where I was at this point. Like, we are seeing some really, really amazing shots in this movie to this point, and it will be a theme for this movie. If there's one thing about this movie that I think stands out, is how beautiful it is and how amazing that it looks. We see some really great shots of some Star Destroyers, the AT-ATs, as you mentioned, and then she ends up sitting, she's eating her rations that she bought from Simon Pegg, in front of an AT-AT, wearing an X-wing helmet that's too big. So I think they're definitely trying to project sort of a childlike thing for her. But then she meets BB-8, and rescues him from this parts dealer who, was trying to sell him for junk, and then he starts following her around. And then we basically learn as part of this that she's really yearning to reunite with her family, which will become a theme for the next two movies and the rest of this one for sure. Then we cut back to Finn breaking, we cut back to the, I guess, is it a destroyer? I don't know where they are, essentially, Ren's ship, and we're introduced, or Finn and Poe are introduced to each other, and they collaborate to steal a TIE fighter, an effort to head back to Jakku, where Finn learns that there is a map to Luke Skywalker. And we see the blooming of a very endearing friendship between these two as they sort of clumsily find their way out of the destroyer. And I'm wondering, like immediately when they start interacting with each other, like I'm really intrigued. Like they seem like best friends that have known each other for forever. And I'm wondering if you kind of felt the same sort of camaraderie when you're watching these guys talk to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's clearly a Luke and Han on the Death Star vibe going on there. In fact, I remember thinking, did one of them get their memory wiped and they didn't know, they actually knew one another and now they're just reuniting? Is one of them lying about who like those kind of things went through my mind. It was instant and it was obvious. And it was very good.
And then we have this scene where they escape from the ship with the TIE fighter, and they're shooting their way out of it. And again, we're seeing a lot of really interesting shots, a lot of great visual shots of the TIE fighter as it's trying to escape from the ship. Then we end up back on Jakku, and Finn. So the TIE fighter crashes. We think Poe is gone, but we know he's not. And Finn and Rey end up meeting, and are immediately tagged by the First Order, and they're running around for their lives at this point. And as they try to escape, we are reintroduced to our first character from the OG trilogy, and maybe arguably my favorite and the most underused, the Millennium Falcon, which is just like, I don't know, like we knew the Millennium Falcon was going to be in this movie because we saw it in the trailer. But I mean, when I hear that, I am just like goosebumps coming out of places I didn't think goosebumps should be. Like I was so incredibly excited about this, and I don't know where you were with that, but I mean, when I saw that, I was just like, oh crap. I mean, they kind of telegraphed it a little bit, but as soon as it happened, I got so excited to see the Millennium Falcon.
This is one of those things where and it's funny, you if you read some reviews will say that that J.J. Abrams did this too much, and I couldn't disagree more. These little kind of these beats and these throwbacks and these introductions of characters, whether it's a ship or a person or what have you, yes, it's clearly pandering to 40-some-year-old guys that grew up on this shit. Clearly, right? But that doesn't make it bad, right? That doesn't make it. In the way the Falcon was introduced here, the way the music is used, this entire scene where Rey and Finn are in the Falcon, escaping from First Order. The gun underneath the turret is fucked up, and Finn can't use it, and Rey has to go and kind of do this maneuver. And again, it's the music and it's everything, right? And not only is it the Falcon that we know and love, but it's since we have come forward 32 years in real time in filmmaking, JJ is able to do things that George Lucas never was able to do in terms of showing us how the Falcon flies and what it can do, and camera angles around it, and this, that, and the other thing. And it is more quote Millennium Falcon than it ever was before, right?
Yeah, for sure.
This particular scene brought me back quite a bit to the asteroid field in Empire, escaping from the big sloth, and those, like it's got a lot of that going on. This is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. This just kind of initial escape from Jakku, from the time that Finn meets Rey until the time they kind of escape on the Falcon. I'm all in. I'm loving every bit of it here.
Yeah, it is so great. And we're going to see, your point is well taken about, what they can do with some of the CG in this movie versus what, Lucas was able to do back then. I mean, if you go back and watch some of the other movies, the Falcon sort of drifts slowly through space, but the Millennium Falcon, in my opinion, it's supposed to be a hot rod, right? It's supposed to be a souped up muscle car that's got nothing but balls under the hood and can, fly incredibly fast from one place to another. And I think that we finally get a sense for what that was meant to be, the way that they showed it here. And there's this scene where, where they're flying around. I think it's after they shoot down the first TIE fighter, and then Rey takes this 90-degree turn and then fires right into the back of the Star Destroyer right before they shoot that second TIE fighter. And it has this really cool visual to it that I think is amazing. And, if there's anything that I'm longing for out of these three movies, if I had to make a top 5 list of all the things that I wished I had more of, it would be the Millennium Falcon. I wish there was more Millennium Falcon in these movies. Like I hope that somehow in future movies that somehow that can be reintroduced or something, because I just think that it's its own character in a really weird way. And I was so excited to see it.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly.
So they our heroes get away from these TIE fighters and they make their way into space, and then it cuts to a scene where we see Kylo Ren throw a childlike fit in a trash console on a destroyer where he trashes a console on the destroyer where he finds out they escaped. And this may arguably not be a scene worth talking about here, but I think this is the first part where we see a different side of Kylo, right? Like we're sort of walking into this movie assuming that Kylo Ren is Darth Vader 2.0. And then we see him throw this massive fit like an overgrown child and trash his own equipment because he's so upset about this. And it really presents a new dimension of our big bad guy. And, immediately I'm a little bit hesitant about this because I certainly expected, the next Darth Vader, and what we're getting is something a little bit different. And it's going to take me a little while and maybe another movie for me to appreciate what they're trying to do with this character. But it's definitely something that's different from what they've done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, he is emo Darth Vader, right? He is, and I think maybe you'll appreciate this reference. He is when Tobey Maguire goes bad in the second Spider-Man movie, like when he's got his hair slicked back and
that's the third one. Yeah.
Is it the third one? Right.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit cheesy, but like that's kind of what Kylo is at this point when he takes off his helmet and you're like, oh, it's just like a 30-something white dude,
Right.
And don't get me wrong, Adam Driver is an amazing actor, but at this point, again, he's just kind of emo Darth Vader, right? He's like, and this is before kind of the connection, or is it? I'm trying to think. Do we know he is Vader's grandfather?
Not yet.
But he's like he's
a wannabe.
Yeah, he's a bitchy Darth Vader. That's what I could describe. Yeah.
It's clearly that he is very derivative of Darth Vader, and we don't yet at this point of the story know why, but he's definitely trying to emulate something, having not earned the ability to do so properly. So this is sort of the first window of what we're going to get from him in the future. But so we have Rey and Finn, and they're escaping. They're flying away in the Falcon, and they're so excited about their escape. And then all of a sudden, they run into another ship that they believe is the First Order, only to find out that the original owners are back in town. And we have our first glimpse on screen of Han Solo and Chewbacca back together, which is one of the single greatest moments of this entire trilogy for me. I remember when they sort of showed that on the trailer, and they board the Falcon, and Han Solo says,
"Chewie, we're home."
And like, I can't even say that without getting chills. Like, it was just the greatest moment. And I think every single showing that I saw going up in the air, I was so excited to see that. And that to me was arguably the most magical moment of the entire trilogy, really, to see Han Solo back on screen with Chewbacca boarding the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing, there's no scene that even comes close. I'm actually getting goosebumps just thinking about it right now. And I've seen this movie, at this point 100 times, right? but yeah, there's something so special about those three characters, right? Han, Chewie, and the Falcon. They are synonymous with one another. And you know what? You know what it was? I think it's only three words, but it's the dialogue there that Han Solo delivers that is, whether it was conscious or subconscious, he's speaking to us as, you know what I mean? Like, he's not Matt and Greg, but he's speaking to 40-some-year-old guys that are or gals that are back in the Star Wars universe, and he's like, "Hey, we're home."
It's
This
meta.
is
Yeah.
right. You know,
It's like he's breaking the fourth wall almost
yeah,
and saying,
yeah,
we're back. Yeah.
yeah, we're back. Right. I mean, you're in the same. It's not the same set, but it's the same set. It's the, you know what I mean? Like, it's clearly practical. He's clearly there. He's not on a green screen. Yeah, and it's just, we're home, right? Here we are. We're back in the Star Wars universe the way it should be done.
I'll tell you why I think why it meant so much to me is that I think if you're a Star Wars fan and you know, and you followed and you know, you've seen interviews with Harrison Ford and things like that, you know, he doesn't have any particular reference to Star Wars, right? Like he understands it's all very much make believe and thinks that people who get really wrapped up in this stuff is ridiculous. And when he comes on screen again after having not been in this role for over 30 years, it's almost like his effort to sort of make up for that, right? Like it's almost like, oh, just kidding, like I'm back, I'm Han Solo and I'm excited to be here. Like I've never given Harrison Ford a lot of credit for being a good actor. He's certainly a fantastic movie star, but as an actor, I think he's passable. But you know, if he doesn't like Star Wars, then I think he deserved an Oscar for this performance, because he did such a good job for somebody who doesn't really care about all of this space nonsense.
You know what? I would agree with that, right? And this is going to sound a little bit weird, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying. Like, Harrison Ford clearly is Han Solo because it's him, right? He is the physical embodiment of that character. But he could have just kind of phoned in this performance and he still would have been Han Solo, right?
Sure.
But it's little things like this where, you know, and I don't know if it's voice inflection, if it's a little nod, if it's a look, if it's a raised eye, you know, it's kind of all of these things. He becomes Han Solo again. You know what I mean? Like, he's back in that character, not just like putting on the outfit. He actually,
yeah.
And again, to your point, whether that is genuine or whether he's just really, really good at acting like Han Solo, either way, it's amazing.
Yeah. He's to your point, he's not going through the motions. He's like, all right, if I'm going to sign up for this, if I'm going to put this crazy suit and this fake blaster on, he's like, I'm going to give it everything I got. And he really did in this movie. This is Han Solo's movie, in my opinion.
Yep.
There's a lot to be said about that, and we'll certainly get into that. But so Han and Chewie board the Falcon, and it's great. It punches you right in all the feels, and then you know, chaos ensues for the sake of having an action scene, and our new heroes and old heroes escape from a couple young adult flavored gangsters and CGI monsters when Han decides to go into light speed from the park position. And then we're introduced into our new big bad, Andy Serkis's Supreme Leader Snoke, which, I don't know, my first impression is Snoke is the dumbest name I've ever heard. I don't know, there was something that just seemed especially goofy about that. He appears unnecessarily large, which left a lot of questions around who he was and what his role would be. And I think we eventually find out that it is a hologram. So it was a little relieved by that, because it seemed a little bit gargantuan and ridiculous. But then, of course, the big reveal, this is the scene where we are tipped off to Kylo's parentage, when we find out that he is in fact the offspring of Han and Leia, which is really interesting. So I'm curious if you can sort of harken back to that. Do you remember how you felt about that revelation? And did you even have a chance to see that one coming?
No, I didn't.
Because we had to assume that Kylo was somebody, right? Like, I think that was the big thing. Like, coming into this movie, everybody was somebody. Like, the new cast, like Rey's going to be somebody and Kylo has to be somebody, and what, because that defines all their motivations, right? So how did you feel about this when they unveiled this?
Yeah, no, I don't really, no, I don't really think I saw it coming. But when it was revealed, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, so no, I was surprised and I didn't see it coming. But when it was out there, I was like, oh yeah, of course he is, right? I guess I had read a ton of the books, of the kind of expanded universe books, and so in that universe, Han and Leia have children, and I believe his name is it Jason Solo, Jason and Jaina maybe,
Yeah.
and so I kind of had that in the back of my mind that okay, that they've got a son, and so I was like, well, maybe this is Jason. Are they going to do that? Those kind of things. So I wasn't like completely blown away, like, oh my God, this is brand new information, right? But I also didn't see it coming, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, real quick, one thing on Snoke, I never liked Snoke. Ever in two movies, never liked him. Didn't think it was a great character. Didn't think there was much behind him. Didn't give a shit when he died. Like just didn't. I was just like, yeah. The best way I could describe him, he's kind of like he was kind of the. I would say he was the Boba Fett of bad guys, but he wasn't even as cool as Boba Fett. But he kind of went out like a bitch the way Boba Fett did in Jedi, and I was just kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. He's gone. Certainly in this movie, even though he was kind of, he's referred to as the supreme leader, and I was just like, yeah, that's not really the big bad. Like, there's clearly somebody else somewhere, and I never was like, I think if we're talking about the comparisons between the Force Awakens and Return of the, or Star Wars or even Empire, I guess the comparison that you would make was, oh, he's the Emperor, right? But I never equated those two. I was never like, oh, that's the Emperor, that's the big bad. Like I never got that feeling, and maybe I was supposed to, but I just never did.
I think it was implied that we were supposed to think that, right? Because he was literally larger than life, and he was clearly strong with the Force in some sort of fashion. But I agree, like I didn't dislike him, but we never really got an opportunity to try to like him because they never gave us anything about Snoke. And I will say that, I guess maybe it's to Ian McDermott's credit, or maybe George Lucas's credit. If you compare the very limited time that the Emperor was available to us in the original trilogy versus, Snoke in this new trilogy, it's the Emperor was barely in Return of the Jedi. He wasn't in any of the other movies, but I still liked him more as a character than I did Snoke at any point ever. And
Yeah.
it's, and I have to say this before I forget it. It's interesting that you bring up the extended universe because I did not go into this movie really thinking much about the extended universe in terms of, will they use these stories? Will they use any of these plot lines? And I don't think that they did, with the exception of one very poignant one that we'll get to in Rise of Skywalker with Palpatine. But until then, like they didn't borrow from any of that material, much like Marvel has used a lot of their old comic book material to frame a lot of those movies. So yeah, I that thought never crossed my mind, but that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, Snoke was just kind of here nor there. Like I was interested to see where it was going to go, but ultimately I didn't, wasn't really sure. And I guess we were going to find out. So our heroes make their way to a planet that will be known as Takodana, which, they don't really do a lot of good planet exposition in this movie, which is one of my beefs. Where Solo, did you just call me Solo? Introduces us to his friend Maz Kanata, who's supposed to get BB-8 and crew back to the Republic. Kylo introduces us to his conflict as he's pleading with the toasted helmet of his grandfather to keep him away from the light. So this is really our first view into Kylo having some level of conflict with who he is and what he's after, right? And this is, for me, this will sort of start a problem that I have with Kylo through the whole series, which is my inability to really believe that he has a conflict. And I don't think that that is a knock on Adam Driver, because I think Adam Driver is a great actor. I'm not sure that they wrote it in a way that really sold me on the fact that he was struggling between it, even when we get to that very infamous scene towards the end of this movie with Han. But seeing the Vader helmet was cool, and it was a little bit of a callback. It was definitely fan service, which is what they do a lot through this movie. But I really enjoyed the fact that they introduced that. And then we come back to Takodana in the cantina, and then we start really kind of opening things up for Finn a little bit when we see his conflict, which is, you know, his fear of the First Order and his desire to try to escape. And then after some hijinks in the cantina, we're reintroduced into Luke's old lightsaber when Rey hears it calling from the basement. And this, to me, like, this was really interesting. Like, I was super excited about this. I think it's really fun that we get to hear both Alec Guinness and Ewan McGregor's voices in this sequence. We see flashes of what looks like a Death Star. We hear Darth Vader's very memorable breathing. And along with meeting the Knights of Ren for the first time, who won't be seen again until Rise of Skywalker. That was sort of a really weird sort of introduction. But I guess maybe, why do you feel like the lightsaber is calling to her? Is it just a plot point that never really flushed out, or are we to think that this is just the reason, this is just something that's trying to get her to find Luke at this point?
The short answer is I don't know. I think it's probably, again, it's kind of that MacGuffin to get her to Luke, because there's really no reason, especially knowing what we ultimately now know about Rey, there's no reason that the lightsaber would call to her, right? I mean, she's not a Skywalker, she's not a Solo, she's a Palpatine, right? So there's, you know, spoiler alert. So there's no reason, even in the canon, that particular weapon or that particular item should call to her. You know, I suppose maybe you could make some sort of connection between the dyad between her and Ben, and that's a really big fucking stretch. I'll be honest with you, this entire like 20 minutes of the movie to me is hot garbage. Like, I didn't like it. I didn't like it the first time I saw it. I didn't like it the other day when I rewatched it.
Really?
Like, from the time, yeah. So like from the time that they walked into this cantina, I didn't like this cantina scene. To me, like, I understand what they're doing. They're trying, like, this was the one time where, again, there's all these kind of comparisons between the two movies. And again, I didn't really catch it until somebody pointed it out. But this one here, I was like, oh, they're redoing the cantina scene. And and even that on opening night, it seemed like a knockoff. Like, it seemed like a cheap, really bad version of the cantina scene. Like, down to the fact that they come in, there's weird music, there's aliens playing games, they scan around, you know, like, just all of it. I didn't like Maz Kanata. Like, she's got a couple kind of quippy one-liners, but I just didn't really care for that character. They never really developed her, not only in this movie but in the subsequent movies.
Terrible.
And then they get into the lightsaber thing, which is kind of cool, but it's just sloppy, in my opinion, right? It's just, especially in this movie, right? There's very little that they explain to us. They don't really show us anything. Yeah, it was kind of cool to hear Alec Guinness, and it was cool to hear Ewan McGregor, but we don't, you know, and they just kind of give us this one line of, well, that's a story for another time. It's like, what? Right. Like, you can't do that. It's like, it's just the ultimate blue ball. It's like, here's this ultimate weapon that we know about, and why the fuck does this little hobbit have it? And we never learn how she got it or why she has it or anything like that. And then Finn just like bitches out, and he's like, I'm out. Like, yeah, I like you, Rey, but I'm gonna go hang out with these guys, and I'm just gonna leave this planet. From the time they walk into the cantina until the time Kylo Ren shows back up, I hate this part. Like, I'm just not a fan at all.
I don't think I feel as strongly as you do, but I definitely think it has problems. And for what it's worth, interestingly enough, I don't have the problem that you do with the Finn piece. I mean, I don't like that about Finn, but I think it's setting up his arc. It's setting him up to sort of bounce back from that and eventually realize that that's something he needs to overcome. The thing that I definitely don't appreciate is the fact that I loved all the bits about the lightsaber. Like, it was really intriguing to watch, but it doesn't pay off. They never really pay it off in the way that I think it deserves. And now we're sort of, JJ Abrams is known for doing the whole mystery box thing. Like, that's his thing. He does the mystery box where he sets up all of these mysteries, and at the end of the day, he says it doesn't matter what's in the box, right? He's done that. I mean, has anyone seen Lost? Like, everybody loved
Yeah.
the first couple of seasons of Lost, and then it turned into a giant pile of shit. He did the movie Mission Impossible 3, and there was this whole plot line around this thing called the Rabbit's Foot. And nobody, I mean, talk about a MacGuffin, nobody knew what it was. They were all after it, and they never even said what it was by the end of the movie. So JJ is very clear, or he's been articulate about, it doesn't matter what's in the box, you just want to keep people along for the ride. And I think that there's some merit to that thought process, but not with Star Wars. Like, with Star Wars, you have to see it through. And I don't really think that they did that. I guess maybe you can make the argument that it was Luke calling out to her through the lightsaber or something, but I don't know. That's a stretch, I think, in my opinion. And
Yeah,
I won't give them the credit that they knew that they were going to make her a Palpatine from that movie, right? Because JJ didn't direct the second movie. He allegedly put out some outlines for what he thought episodes 8 and 9 would be, but I don't think they were followed. So I don't think there was any sort of forecasting to where she was going to end up. I think he just thought, I'm going to do this first movie, I'm going to set up all these mysteries, and I'm going to let the next guy figure it all out. And it ultimately just sort of left us flat, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's something to be said for, hey, you can set up a mystery box here, but you need to pay it off somewhere, right? Not even in this movie. You could set it up, you could pay it off 3 movies from now, but you got to pay it off, right?
Right. That was a big one too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it was, yeah, and literally the only explanation we got was, well, that's a story for another time. Well, fuck you. Like, you got to give me something, right?
Right.
And I mean, you literally could have explained it in 3 lines of dialogue. Like something. It wouldn't have been very satisfying, but you could have given me something, right? And they didn't. And I would agree with you. I don't, and we'll never know, right? Unless there's some kind of tell-all documentary. But I don't think there's a chance in hell that they thought Rey was going to be a Palpatine at this point.
I doubt it. No, I don't think so. I think
if I had to guess, at this point, she either would have been a Skywalker offspring, which would have made sense from the lightsaber calling her, right, or a Kenobi offspring.
Yeah,
which would have made less sense. If she would have been Luke's daughter, it makes all the sense in the world.
Sure.
Right? It makes all the sense in the world. Now, at the end of the day, would I have preferred her to be Luke's daughter or Kenobi's daughter? I don't know. But I think at this point, the fact that they literally never paid that off is a big strike against this movie.
Yeah, it definitely didn't hit well, or it was a tease that was in the end very unnecessary because it didn't really go anywhere. And I do think that they actually explained what happened with the lightsaber and how it got back into Maz's possession in the comics. But whether it's that lightsaber or whether it's C-3PO's red arm or whatever, like, I didn't need Star Wars to be sort of a gateway into all their other forms of media just to try to figure out what all these other things meant. So yeah, that didn't do much for me, but at the time it was intriguing because I thought they were going to answer it, but they never did. So then we see the power up, we'll call it Death Star 3.0, which is also known as Star Killer Base, as it destroys the Hosnian system, which, this is another big strike. Like I mentioned earlier, that Takodana and Jakku and all that stuff, they weren't, Jakku was name dropped many times, but some of these other environments and planets really weren't. And I'm wondering if you even followed at this part. So we see the full power of the Star Killer Base when it destroys the Hosnian system, which I don't even think they named it at that point of the movie. But that was, as my understanding, that was the home of the New Republic. And and they didn't. I don't think they spell that out unless I missed it or they didn't do a very clear job of it. But we're supposed to think that they have basically destroyed all of the New Republic with the exception of whatever's left over, which is what we see, at the towards the end of the movie and as they're gathering to take on the base and everything. Like, did you get that, or am I just maybe not paying attention because I'm caught up in everything else?
Um, I understood just from the visual and audio cues that it was a huge deal, right? I don't know that I necessarily understood that it was as big as they purported it to be. I don't think it was as impactful to me as Alderaan was in Star Wars.
Which very derivative again, if we're talking
Right?
about
Yeah.
rebooting this movie, it's the
Right.
scene where the big planet killer weapon blows
Yeah.
up the important good guy base.
I don't think it was as impactful as that. Now, there's a couple reasons for that, right? It might have been because on Alderaan, that was the first time I've ever seen anything remotely close to that on cinema, right? So it was the first, blah blah blah. I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it. I knew it was important. I don't know that I knew it was as important as the movie would lead me to believe it is, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, well, the reason Alderaan was important was because of Carrie Fisher, because she sold that part in A New
Right.
Hope, right? When she's being held there and she's going back and forth with Tarkin and Vader about all that stuff. And she's the one that sells that. It has nothing to do with a CGI picture of a planet exploding. It's all about her and how she's distraught and how she's trying to divert them from destroying her own planet and all that. But we don't get that in this movie. We just get basically Hux gets out there and he makes this big speech, this big Nazi-like speech to all of the New Order.
It's all the Nazis, right?
Yeah, right.
It is so
It is,
Adolf Hitler. It's not even funny.
It is straight out of some Indiana Jones movie. It really feels that way, and it's good and it's entertaining and it's fine. But it doesn't. I just didn't think that they gave us enough of exposition to understand what were they blowing up and why do we care, right? Like, it's a big deal, but why? Right. So yeah, I mean, I had a little problem with that. But so the First Order, finds so our heroes and this fantastic battle ensues, which shows Finn with a lightsaber, and which is interesting because it's not something we've ever seen frequently in the hands of somebody who isn't a Jedi, and he's fighting this new order this First Order trooper who apparently has this weapon that can repel a lightsaber. It's the first time I think we've seen that, at least in the new trilogy. We did see that a little bit in the prequels. We also see Han using Chewie's bowcaster, which is a real fun scene, and a cameo from one of my favorite directors, Mr. Kevin Smith, whose voice announces the arrival of the familiar X-wing fighter from the first act. So that's when our good guys come back in, and we get that awesome visual of the X-wings hovering very, very lowly over the water, and they come in and they save the day. And of course, Poe's X-wing is flying all around the skies in this really great dogfight and just blowing up ships left and right. And then Rey has her first encounter with Kylo, in which he overpowers her until he's able to basically put her in a catatonic state and take her away for interrogation, which is apparently in lieu of actually. So he's trying to find Luke Skywalker's whereabouts, and he didn't get the droid the first time, and now he's not getting the droid a second time. So he gets her because he feels like she's seen the map, and he just assumes he can pull that information out of her, which we learn he can't. And then the Resistance finally lands, and we get this long-awaited reunion between Princess Leia, or General Leia, as we will know her, and Han Solo, and of course C-3PO. And I don't know about you, but like, this scene for me was really, really anticipated. I don't know if it paid off the way that I hoped it would, just because Carrie Fisher definitely seemed to not, the years of not being on screen were evident, I think, when we saw her. And I think she looked the part, but she had this really gravelly voice that was almost distractingly different from what we're used to there. But the moment was sweet, and that they got back together, and then they sort of reunited for a minute. But kind of curious to if you can remember back to how you kind of felt in that moment when we see Han and Leia back again for the first time.
Leia in this trilogy, to me, is a disappointment. The entire now, I understand Carrie Fisher died. I understand that they had to do some things and kind of splice some footage together and this, that, and the other thing. There's very few scenes in this entire sequel trilogy where Leia is that I actually enjoy. I don't know if I'm a romantic, but I was not thrilled that their relationship clearly didn't end up well, right? They're divorced or at least separated or what have you. Again, Han Solo is my guy. He was always my favorite. So I kind of wanted him to live happily ever after. But I would agree with you. I mean, we talked earlier about how Harrison Ford became Han Solo for this role, right? I don't know that Carrie Fisher did, right? And I don't know if I don't know why that is. I don't know if she didn't care. I don't know if she was getting on an age. I don't know if she was sick, right? She passed away shortly hereafter. I don't know why that is, but she didn't connect with this character the way Harrison Ford did, or even the way Mark Hamill did, right? So I was kind of let down with the Leia scenes. I liked the fact. Here's where I will give Carrie Fisher credit. Carrie Fisher plays the grieving mother very well, right? Where she's talking about, when she starts talking about Ben or Kylo, I believe that a lot. I believe the grieving mother piece. Where I'm not really on board is her interaction with Han, if that makes sense. Like their relationship, like the relationship she has with her son, I can feel. I don't feel the relationship she has with her husband or ex-husband or whatever they are at this point.
Yeah, I can see that. I will agree with you to a certain extent for sure. Like this movie with Carrie Fisher and Leia, it felt, oh gosh, this is going to sound really terrible. So send your hate mail to me, but it felt very similar to Karen Allen when she came back in the fourth Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
To me,
totally
it just seemed out of place. She seemed a little unpolished, but I can't tell if it's her, if it's the writing or the character or whatever, but it just didn't feel, to your point, she didn't feel like Princess Leia to me. And I think we see, in my personal opinion, we see a notable improvement when we get to The Last Jedi. They're not, spoiler alert, there are not a lot of things I like about The Last Jedi, but I think Carrie Fisher does a great job in that with what she's given specific for that movie. Her character is given more time, it's given more depth. Right now, she's not really given much of anything. It's really more of just, let's watch her and Han sort of have their moments. And I felt kind of similar to you. Like, it was really disappointing to see, because we were both going into this movie not knowing anything about Han Solo or Princess Leia or Luke Skywalker or any of these characters. So we had no idea what the status of anybody's relationship was. So to find out almost early on, because Han tips us off when she's like, "You're Han Solo," and he's like, "I used to be," and you sort of understand right from there, like, something has gone wrong along the way. And I'd love to find out what that was, but that's obviously not a part of this story. But yeah, I do agree with you. There's something that's a little bit underwhelming about this whole thing, but I do think that we get better with it as we go through the saga a little bit. But we see Poe and Finn reunite at this point, which was a nice moment because we had this bromance that happened earlier on in the movie, and then they finally reunite, not knowing, not having seen each other since Poe, or I should say Finn, thought that Poe was dead, and was happy to realize that that wasn't the case. And I feel like it's a bit of a motif that we go back to a couple times in the next couple movies, where they have this moment where they reconcile somehow. And then the team learns that they can't find the rest of this map. And then R2 shows up only to remain in low power mode. This is one of the worst parts of the entire movie. Like, what the fuck kind of logic is this? Like, I'm supposed to believe that a droid gets so sad that Luke Skywalker disappears that he just goes into low power mode, and for what reason? Like what? And then
Yeah,
we haven't even gotten to the part where he wakes back up. But it's just like it is the worst kind of contrivance that I felt like we could have just left him out of this movie at that point. Like,
yeah, it's really bad. Let me see if I can make this statement. Yeah, R2 is by far my least favorite portrayal of a original trilogy character of this entire thing. Like it's and that includes Luke, who literally has no lines.
right.
It's terrible.
He's
Like
not a character in this movie. He's a
no,
paperweight.
he's a trash can. Like he's legit a trash can, right? And you're right. And the thing that kind of puts the nail in the coffin is like when he fucking wakes up and it's like, oh, he had the whole thing the whole time. Fuck you. Like
Yeah.
just
Bad.
come on.
Bad
Yeah,
storytelling.
It's really bad. And no, I agree. Yeah, this is just you could have just left him out complete. You could have left him and C-3PO out 100%, and this movie would not have been a single iota worse off if you left them out.
I mean, I know
100%.
why they didn't leave them out, and I'm glad that they didn't leave them out, but this is not what they should have been given to do. And
Yeah.
it really bothers me that it seems so forced in there. It's so contrived, and it's so
I almost would rather have them treated in this movie the way they are in Rogue One, where they're literally just like they roll into the bottom of a scene.
Yep.
Yeah, I would rather have that than this, right? At least then you could still say, yep, okay, they've been in every Star Wars movie. But yeah, this is bullshit. It's just not good.
It's lazy storytelling. It's lazy writing is what it is. Like they knew that they wanted to get him involved somehow, but this is the best they could think of, and it's pretty poor.
Yeah, I agree.
But we have some moments that I think are nice. I think that the initial moment between Han and Leia is a little bit awkward, but I think as they start to have some more screen time together, it starts to get a little bit more interesting, and they try to reconcile a little bit of their mistakes that they made as parents and agree to try to, do what they can to try to get Kylo back. And, then we get to we go back to Rey and Kylo when Kylo is trying to interrogate her, and we get to see the real face. This is the first scene where we get to see Adam Driver's face. And I think it was a really interesting story choice, because obviously Darth Vader being the big bad guy, we don't get to see him unmasked until the final sort of chapter of the last movie. And we're seeing Kylo Ren's face almost from the beginning of this series. And we learn very quickly that Kylo is not deformed. He's not mangled. He's not in need. He doesn't even need the mask, right? Darth Vader needs the mask to live, to breathe. Kylo doesn't need any of that. And I think he's exposed at that point as being his own sort of Darth Vader fanboy. And I think that starts to endear me a little bit more to what they're trying to do with the character. It's a little bit harder to swallow, because you want that big bad guy and you don't really feel like you have that. You really just have sort of an immature child who's trying to deal with all this stuff. But then this is the point where we learn that Rey is at least force sensitive when she resists the interrogation and eventually uses her newfound powers to escape the interrogation room, which cues Kylo's tantrum number 2. And then Starkiller Base begins charging the weapon by draining a nearby sun in about the same amount of time it takes to perform a Microsoft Windows update to blow up the known location of the remainder of the Resistance squad in the Ilenium system. And then Han and Leia have, what's going to end up being their last moments together, with a really heartwarming hug. And this is a moment that I feel like they showed it in the trailer, and it's a really good one. She's like, "Bring back our son." This is, I don't know if we knew this would be the last moment that we saw them together on screen, but it was, I thought it was a really good moment. I really liked it a lot.
Yeah, it was. Like I said earlier, where I like Leia in this film is when she's dealing and with her son, right? And this is one of those moments where she's not only interacting with Han, but she's talking about her son, right? She's being a mother here more than she is being a wife, if that makes sense. But no, this is a great scene. It is in my opinion the best scene from Carrie Fisher in this sequel trilogy.
Yes.
It's this is the one time when, and this is going to sound stupid, this whole, where she's Leia. She actually feels like Leia here, to me at least, you know.
Yeah.
So no, I agree. Yeah.
Well, she shows real emotion, and we get the sense from this scene that they went through a lot of shit together, right? Like something happened in the past, and we don't know what that is, and we're never going to know what that is because I don't think they're ever going to tell us that story. But you know, it's a scene where you see a mother and a father who really care about a child that they feel like is, you know, potentially gone from them. And you know, as a parent, as I'm watching this as a father, you know, like I get that more now than I would have, you know, 5 years before that. So I agree. I think that's her best scene in the movie, and it was really well done, and it makes me want more of that, which we won't get, unfortunately, but that's what I want. So the rescue efforts begin when Han and Chewie and Finn make their way to the Starkiller base to try to shut down the shields. Again, you know, very derivative of some previous storylines. And they accost Captain Phasma, who, this is the first time we've mentioned her name in this this show. You mentioned Snoke being sort of likened to Boba Fett. I think Captain Phasma is definitely this trilogy's Boba Fett, right? Because she gets nothing, and she's cool looking, but she's got nothing. She's got no substance, and she's very not
superficial,
unfairly, but she's very much she's just simply dispatched in the next movie without any real care. And it was disappointing because I think that as a character was a really interesting, you know, sort of second mate type of, or next in command kind of thing, where they could have really taken that and went somewhere with it. And I it was lame. The whole character was wasted in my opinion.
It was incredibly lame, especially when you factor in the toys that they made of this character. I mean, I can't even tell you how many Phasma action figures there were, and they looked really fucking cool. I mean, she's got a great design. She's the only like silver character out there.
She looks cooler than Kylo. I'm going to go ahead and say it.
Absolutely, she absolutely does. And I think there's some like in a book or something somewhere where like her armor is actually made from the spaceship that Anakin and Padme, or like that spaceship in episode 1, is actually, I might be misquoting, but there's some connection there, I think. I don't know if it's the same metal or the same alloy or whatever it is.
It's kind of cool.
But again, she turns out like, she's the bitch of this, right? I mean, she dies the same way kind of Boba does. I was not I've never watched Game of Thrones. So I know this actress is a big Game of Thrones gal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's why this character became kind of the cult favorite, but yeah, it's just ultimately it's a whole lot ado about nothing.
Well, Gwendolyn Christie, I believe is her name, and she was fantastic in Game of Thrones. Like, she was really, really, really good. I have to think this is somewhat of a Kathleen Kennedy move, because, you know, we haven't really talked about this a lot, but this version of the franchise is very female forward in terms of, you know, the protagonist being a female. You know, this is just pure hypothesis at this point, but, you know, like having a female bad guy alongside of all of these other characters, I think is kind of part of that. And I think Gwendolyn Christie is I don't know the right way to say this, but I think in terms of stature, she's a big female. Like she's, you know, she can be physically imposing in a lot of these scenes that she's put in, and I think that's a big reason why she was cast in this. Is she a big lady? I've never seen. Like she's super tall, and she's I guess I don't know the right way to say that, but I mean she's not petite, she's not demure, but
so she's just a large female. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. Like, she's
Yeah.
large. That's
Yeah.
okay. I
She,
didn't know that. Okay.
She plays basically a warrior character in Game of Thrones, like somebody that if you watch Game of Thrones, you would absolutely believe that she could kick your ass. Like
Okay.
So she was.
Is she like a Xena warrior princess kind of thing?
Not as it relates to Game
I've
of
not
Thrones.
watched that either, but okay.
But
Okay.
right. But
Okay.
needless to say, like she can sell as a female, she can sell an action role very well. And so I think she was very well cast for it. I just don't think she was very well used in the role once they cast her. But I didn't hold that against this movie because I thought it was going to pan out somewhere down the road.
Yeah.
And it just didn't. But that's no fault to Force Awakens. But
this is the Matrix 2 and 3 syndrome, right? Like,
right.
How I feel about this is what's going to depend on what comes in the future.
Right. And yeah, let's not talk about what Matrix 3 did for everybody. But
yeah.
So we get Poe and team to take about 12 or so X-Wings to target a thermal oscillator in the Starkiller base, which again, this is where we get severely derivative of the first Star Wars movie. This is where all of those comparisons should really come in. And then of course, Han and Chewie and Finn and Rey are all attempting to blow up the Starkiller base from the inside. And as we're going through these scenes, Kylo and his father finally meet when Han shouts Ben from across a long, unnecessary catwalk. For dramatic purposes only. Like there's no space station in the universe that should have a catwalk like this without railings or anything like that. Yeah, so we find out his name is Ben, which is really interesting. I think it's really cool that they this is clearly a nod to Obi-Wan and his legacy and all of that, and we get this scene, which is to me, like, I remember being quite literally on the edge of my seat. And so Han and Ben are talking with each other, and Kylo is clearly struggling because he knows what he needs to do, and Han offers to help him. But Kylo ultimately ignites his blade, and we see one of our heroes stare very frighteningly into the face of his own son before he falls into this endless abyss. And I don't know, like this, I feel like I should have known this was coming, because Harrison Ford, very famously asked to be killed in Return of the Jedi, his character to be killed in Return of the Jedi, because he felt like it would have had more stakes. And he quite frankly didn't want anything more to do with this series after that. So it's not surprising that they were able to get him back for this, only to sort of honor his wishes by killing him. But when it happened, like, I don't know how I can explain how I felt about it, but I mean, shivers from top to bottom when we saw him plummet. Like, what was your recollection of how you felt when that scene happened?
Very similar to yours. In retrospect, I should have seen it coming a fucking mile away, but I didn't. I was just like, oh my God, they just killed Han Solo, right? I just like, I couldn't wrap my mind around that. I remember thinking, so let me ask you a question. There's this dialogue when they're out on this, again, this fucking abnormally long thing with no
very dangerous catwalk, right?
Like who the fuck would ever walk out there?
No
like,
signs that say, hey, please don't walk on this, because there are no railings. You're gonna fall, dumbass.
Nobody in their right mind would ever go out there, ever. But whatever. So there's this dialogue where they're talking about, I know what I have to do. And something to that. I don't remember exactly what they said. But what is it that he has to do? Is it that he has to kill Han Solo? Is that what he has to do?
I think at that part of the story, yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that he knows that he has to kill Han Solo because he wants to be a bad guy, but he's feeling this conflict, right?
Does Han know that?
No, I don't think he knows that.
So what does Han think he has to do? Because Han says, I'll help you, or something like that.
Han says, I'll help you, and he tries to take the lightsaber from Kylo. And I think Kylo is sort of in his own mind bouncing back and forth between what he wants to do. And then I think we're led to believe that once that sun goes down, or once that sun is gone and the darkness sort of falls, Kylo gets his cue, and he just he ignites the blade, and he just does it.
So what do we think Han thought he needed to do? Like, what was Han helping him with? Did Han know that he had to kill him and he was sacrificing himself?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my opinion is that no, I don't think Han was that bright of a character, if I'm being honest. Like, I
No,
don't
he
think
wasn't. Yeah.
he did that for the greater good of what would come later. Like, I think he genuinely wanted to try to help his own son and thought that that's what he was doing. And Kylo sort of decided for himself at the end of that scene that what he needed to do was, kill his father and eventually his mother. But yeah, that was a jarring scene. It really was. I mean, Harrison Ford really sold that so incredibly well. When he reaches up and he touches Kylo's face, and then he just sort of plummets and falls away. And I can't help but thinking there's some sort of irony of Han Solo being killed by a lightsaber. Like,
right? Yeah.
For some reason, for the longest time, I thought that was just so incredibly ironic, because hokey religions and ancient weapons and all that stuff, and for him to be killed by that, it was jarring. And I think for me, even though I sort of probably subconsciously realized it was going to happen, like, I knew there was no coming back from that. Like, there's no Force ghost. Turns out there is for him, but
right. Well, so it's funny you said that, right? And I imagine this is something that we will talk about in subsequent episodes. But two quick things for that. One is the gravitas, for lack of a better term, that this scene provided made the scene in Rise of Skywalker that much better, because it was clearly kind of a mirror image of this scene.
Yeah,
right.
We'll definitely talk about that.
We will definitely talk about that, right? But and we'll talk about it when we get to Rise of Skywalker as well. I still have a hard time reconciling the fact kind of where Ben Solo goes, or where Kylo goes, based on this scene in The Force Awakens, right? Because no matter how good he is at the end of the day, he still fucking killed his father, right? Like, he just did.
Well, and the same argument can be made about Anakin Skywalker, who killed a bunch of children.
Right, absolutely.
And somehow gets redeemed at the end of Return of the Jedi. But of course, Return of the Jedi was made before
he killed all those kids.
Before he killed all those kids.
Yeah. So again, we'll get there. But I think, but I really, and again, it might have just been kind of dumb luck, right? But that scene in Rise of Skywalker made that movie for me, or it was one of the pieces, because of how poignant this scene was.
Yes.
Right. It was that, so Han has the lightsaber literally going through him, and he reaches out and he touches his son's face, and he just kind of brushes it aside. Right. And it's like, as a parent, it's like, it's all the feels, right? It's like,
so much,
it
wouldn't have affected me nearly the same way if I wasn't a father at that point.
Not at all. Not at all.
Not that I can put myself in the shoes of a fictional character like Han Solo, but like, I, at that moment, seeing the look on his face, all I could think of is he really wanted to help his son. He really wanted nothing more than to bring his son home and to give him all the love that he needed and deserved. And he realized at that moment he failed, and that his son had betrayed him and had, decided to take a darker path. And that was tragic. That was so sad to see that happen. And we'll definitely get to Rise of Skywalker. I don't want to spoil that, because I think that there's a really important reason that they did that scene in Rise of Skywalker and why it mirrors this one.
Yeah.
But
we'll get there.
But this was crazy, and it was tough to watch, and it was powerful. And I remember holding my breath and being like, "Oh my God, I cannot believe that they did that." And then Chewie is pissed, and he takes out half the First Order and Kylo's balls with his bowcaster as the as the Starkiller base completes its charge and gets ready to fire. And then Rey and Finn, what's that?
I was just gonna say, from the time Han dies until the time they get back to the base, this is my favorite Chewie of the entire entire time. He's he's gutted. He's lost his best friend. He's lost his soulmate. He's lost his whatever it is, the life pact or whatever it is. And this is the Chewbacca that, let the Wookiee win, right? Don't fuck with the Wookiee because he's gonna fuck shit up. And this is what he does. And I love it. My nickname is Chewie. It's one of my all-time favorite characters. This is the Chewie that I kind of know and love.
I think it's great that they finally gave him a moment, right? Like he doesn't feel like a sidekick anymore when this happens, which is great. I think they do him a little bit of a disservice at the end of the movie when him and Leia cross paths and don't even acknowledge each other after all this happens, which is maybe more of an oversight from an editing perspective than anything. But the idea that Chewie and Leia don't have a moment about Han is really, really bizarre to me. But I think that was an oversight that they can't go back and fix.
Yeah.
But so at this point, Rey and Finn retreat and they're tracked down by Kylo in these wintry woods. And Finn is called a traitor for the second time in the film, which seems to be an interesting motif. Like the entire First Order seems to be really upset about him being a traitor. And he tries his best, but nearly loses his life as he is ill-equipped to handle Kylo Ren in a laser sword fight. So, we get this next scene, which is really interesting, where Finn is down for the count, and we think that Rey is out, and Kylo clearly wants that lightsaber, and he reaches forward and tries to grab it through the Force, and when it shoots up and heads his direction, it zooms right past his head, and Rey catches it. And what I didn't realize until just today, and this is really interesting. So when she catches that lightsaber, in my mind, that is the official beginning of the hero's journey for her, right? Like this is sort of equivalent to the scene in A New Hope where Luke stumbles upon his aunt and uncle who have been murdered by the stormtroopers and then realizes that, okay, because Luke at that point in the story had sort of reconciled himself and said, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a hero. I don't want to save the universe. I'm just going to be a farmer. And he was going to go back and he was going to do that. And at this point through the whole movie, Rey's been fighting her hero's journey, the whole Campbellian archetype. And it's at this moment that Rey realizes, or that Rey officially sort of takes the mantle to be the hero. And what's even more fascinating to me is that if you paid any attention to this, the music in this scene is not even it's not even redone through the orchestra. It's exactly lifted from that same scene in A New Hope where Luke discovers his aunt and uncle, and the scene where he sort of has that moment where he realizes, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Like they use the exact same cue. Is
it where Baru and Owen are like on fire?
Yes,
that one. Okay.
Yes, that scene where they literally used the same music, like they copy and pasted it into this movie. And it doesn't appear that way on the soundtrack, but it is on the movie. And when you watch it, it's like, holy shit, I didn't realize how powerful that moment was until I realized they used the same music. And they used the same music because it is the same moment. It is at different parts of the movie. For Luke, it's much earlier. For Rey, it's towards the end of the movie. But it's the part where Rey officially says, okay, like I'm on board, like I'm gonna do this, even though I've been fighting it the whole movie. And I thought that was really interesting, and I really love the way that they did that. And then Kylo and Rey fight, while the X-Wings take advantage of the bombs that Chewie and company had left behind. And what Star Wars movie is going to be complete without a couple of X-Wings in a trench trying to blow up a large planet-killing weapon, right? So Rey resists Kylo's persuasion to bring her to the dark side and manages to escape with Finn and the Falcon after the planet starts coming apart as it's blowing up. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, I've heard a lot of feedback and a lot of people have given this movie criticism about Rey being overpowered, about her being able
Mary Sue
to come into this scene and just totally wipe out Kylo. Now, I don't feel like a lot of people keep in mind the fact that Kylo is wounded, right? Like Chewie shot him right in the crotch region, or probably right in the hip, right? Because you see him, you catch those scenes where he's hitting himself and there's blood falling on the ground and all that. So he's injured. But Rey seems to learn how to use a lightsaber very quickly, having never picked one up before. And I'm curious to know, like, was that a problem for you? It wasn't for me specifically. Like, I just went with it. I enjoyed everything. But for some people, they're like, this isn't right. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism around Rey, and she's a Mary Sue, right? I.e., she kind of knows everything. She can kind of pick up the mantle and just kind of be a badass. To answer your question specifically, no, it did not bother me at all. I guess I can't quite put my finger on why. I think it's probably because I always knew she was something special in the story, right? Yes, she's kind of been their scavenger, but she's clearly something special, right? We just don't know it yet. And so I was willing to and I'm not even suggesting like she's going to be a Palpatine or a Skywalker or a Kenobi or whatever, but it was clearly something, right? And we already knew, because even in this movie, we've seen her use the Force. So no, it didn't bother me. I was okay with that. Never really crossed my mind, to be honest with you. But once I started reading those criticisms, I started thinking back to Empire. Luke did the same thing. Luke stood up to Vader. Yeah, he lost, but he stood up to Vader in Empire after like 12 days of training to be a Jedi. Like, I mean, he wasn't a Jedi, but he was okay. The issue that I had with this scene was not so much between Rey and Kylo. The issue that I had with this scene is they have seemed to have forgotten the rules and the laws of what a lightsaber does. That's the problem that I have. A lightsaber up until now, and again, at this point, we are 6.5 movies in, or 6 3/4 of movies in. Lightsabers take limbs off. Lightsabers, cut off heads, they cut off arms, they cut off this, that, and the other. They go through walls, they, heat up blast doors, they take out droids, this, that, and the other thing. And in this scene right here, you've got Finn that kind of gets shot down or cut down with a lightsaber, and it's just kind of like a glancing blow, no big deal, right? That's the problem that I have with this particular scene. It's like, and I don't even really have a problem with Finn, the fact that he can use a lightsaber, because he gets his ass handed to him pretty quickly, right? There's been some discussion. Does Finn have some Force affinity? I don't know. Maybe not. Doesn't really matter to me. Kylo kicks his ass pretty quickly. But yeah, the problem that I have here is kind of the way they deal with the rules of the lightsaber within the Star Wars universe. That being said, this scene where Rey catches the lightsaber, holy shit, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, when that lightsaber does a 90-degree angle and comes to Rey and she catches it and ignites it and puts it right here and just like,
Yeah.
dude, it's fucking awesome.
Watch it again with the realization that the exact music cue that they use is the same one that they used from A New Hope.
Yeah.
And it'll change you. It'll make it even more, believe it or not. It'll make it that much more.
It's awesome. I mean, I've got all the goosebumps right now just talking about it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I have no problem with the fact that she beats Kylo here. I have no problem with the fact that she's overpowered. I have no idea. I guess in my mind I was like, oh, she's channeling the Force. She is the Force, and it never crossed my mind twice. I never was like, oh, she's too powerful like that. The whole Mary Sue thing never crossed my mind.
We are set up to believe that she is the next, prophesized, whatever you want to call it. She's the next Luke Skywalker, the next Anakin Skywalker. Yeah.
I had no problem at all. We had this scene earlier in the movie that we talked about where she had these visions of the box at Maz Kanata's, and like I didn't understand it, but I was like, oh, well, she's clearly, there's some connection there, and I went with it. I had no problem at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I was the same way. I think that I don't know if the lightsaber rules or physics have changed. I think that they just didn't have the balls to really severely impair anybody with a lightsaber in that scene. I think we're supposed to believe that there were just multiple near misses with lightsabers, which doesn't seem very practical. But with Finn or even with Kylo, because he got his face sliced up, but it just created a little scar versus chopping off his entire head. So yeah, I get what you're saying about that. I think that was just a sort of that was a story contrivance to make sure that we could tell the story that somebody was hurt, but that they weren't mortally wounded.
Right.
But from that point, we get Poe and team to do a very Star Wars-esque, or I should say New Hope-esque run on Starkiller Base, and it explodes, and our heroes return to the Resistance for a very short-lived celebration. And this sort of gets into my big issue with this one scene where, again, I think it was just an oversight, and it's a pretty glaring one. But there is a scene where we see Rey and Leia confront each other after meeting for the first time after Rey gets back there, and you see Chewie walk right by Leia, like it's right by, like not even acknowledge each other. And I have a hard time believing that that would ever happen in a world where Han Solo just died. And that was super disappointing. And I think they tried to make up for that later in Rise of Skywalker when Leia dies. But that to me was just like, you missed an opportunity. We didn't. What we'll find out when The Last Jedi starts is we never really have an opportunity to properly mourn the death of Han Solo. And that's something that really kind of sticks with me. I think they actually do in the novelization of The Last Jedi to some extent, but we don't have time to do that when The Last Jedi starts. And that's hard because I think that's something that we all needed as part of that. But it is what it is. And then, of course, R2, as we talked about, this magically comes back to life, only to remember that he has the rest of the map, which is a terrible, terrible contrivance. And I hated it. I hated how they did this scene. I mean, I realized that we sort of are at the end of the third act and we have to get to Luke Skywalker at some point. But the fact that he was just magically asleep and now magically wakes up and there's nothing, there's just absolutely no explanation for any of it was really, really unsettling for me.
Yeah, from the time Starkiller Base explodes, like basically the rest of the movie to me was kind of in fast forward mode.
Yeah, let's get to Luke. Let's get to Luke.
Yeah, right. And candidly, I forgot about Luke. Right. I literally forgot about, I was like, oh shit, like we need to get back to Luke. And then to your point, like R2 just wakes up and is like, oh, I've had it the whole time. Oh, fuck you. Like that's really bad.
Yeah.
It's really weak. And yeah, candidly, I totally missed the whole Chewie walking in the background thing. Had I caught it, it would have pissed me off too. I remember there's this kind of embrace between Leia and Rey, and I remember even seeing it that opening night. I was like, well, wait a minute, you don't know each other,
right?
At all. Like,
I like that moment, but I thought but
it's not.
It shortchanged the moment that she should have had with Chewbacca, right?
Yeah, it's not earned at all. That's right. The first time they meet. Like, you're not going to embrace. You don't. Leia doesn't know the time that Rey has had with Han, and Rey certainly doesn't understand the relationship that Han had with Leia. And yeah, it was like a very weird, hey, we're girls, so let's hug, right? Like it was very superficial and very kind of thrown together. And again, I didn't even realize that Chewie walked by in the background. Had I seen that, it would have pissed me off.
Oh,
I didn't even
shoulder to shoulder. They walk right by each other. It's not even like he's like a character that walks in the back. Like they walk directly beside each other.
That's like,
and there's no acknowledgement. That was a real disappointment. But I mean, whatever. It is what it is. Yeah, I understand that they had to tell the story. So
and then kind of the way it ends, right? It ends with, it actually ends. I was okay with the ending, right? It kind of ends with a really good cliffhanger, right? You get Rey on this planet, and you see Luke, and right,
Yeah.
and you see Luke finally, and I won't lie and say that I wasn't flaming pissed that Luke didn't even fucking say anything. It was like, wow, you know, it was like the ultimate blue balls.
Yeah.
But it was like, holy shit, there's Luke. Like,
Yeah.
Luke's alive.
And he looked so fucking cool.
Oh, he looked amazing, right?
He looked so weathered and so badass. And oh my God, I was so excited when I saw him. And then I just sort of realized in that moment, I'm like, they're going to fade to black here. Like it's
sure
going to
enough,
cut. And that's exactly what they did.
You know, and I guess, I mean, but when you talk about like the ultimate cliffhanger, right? You got the cliffhanger of, oh my God, Luke is alive. Because at that point, we didn't even really know if he was alive. Like maybe he is, maybe he's not. Like we're looking for him. And again, you mentioned it in the open, like he is the ultimate MacGuffin, right? It's like he's this thing that we're chasing. That, you know, he's the Matrix in the or the Allspark in the Transformers movies, right? It's like like you don't know what it is, but you're chasing it. But to actually see, I'm glad they paid it off, right? Like they could have just done the same movie, just never paid it off. But you know, and just they could have ended it with like Luke or with Rey getting to the island and just like stopping it there. At the very least, they gave us Luke,
right?
Which was good. But you know, of course, then that makes us kind of salivate for the next 2 years. And then I would argue that like the way they treated Luke in the subsequent movies was shitty, but we'll get there.
Oh, we will definitely fucking get there, because
we'll get there.
I've got problems all day long with that. But
but at this point, it was good, right? It was good the way that it was good. He was again, we'll get to why he was there and his motivation and blah blah blah. But I was glad we saw him, and for the, you know, 37 seconds he was on screen, it was amazing to see presumably Jedi Master Luke on screen and alive and well.
It was a magical moment, but I think it was also a moment of somewhat profound sadness, because it was at that moment that I realized that we would never see our three main characters on the screen at the same time again. And you know, we're getting ready to sort of wrap this up and kind of talk about our final thoughts, but so I'll sort of tease, you know, one of my biggest criticisms of this movie is that we missed the opportunity to see Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess Leia together on the same screen at the same time, which was, you know, such a great thing in Return of the Jedi. We got that so many times. And, you know, I'm really sort of beside myself that they didn't think to try to make that happen, right? Because that is one of the most endearing things about, you know, the original trilogy, and certainly the Return of the Jedi, in my opinion, is the fact that they all work together to try to push towards a common goal. And the fact that they never took the opportunity to make that happen is the biggest miss for this entire trilogy, in my opinion.
Yeah, yes, it is by far the biggest miss of this sequel trilogy. The fact that they didn't get them together, you know, the way the story played out, I can understand why they didn't, because it would have been really contrived.
It would have been hard to do it the way that JJ wanted to tell it, for sure.
Right. It would have been really, really contrived to get them together. I'm more upset that we didn't get Han and Luke together than than the fact that we didn't get the trilogy together. You know, but hey, reasons.
And we'll get there by the time we get through all three of these movies.
We will.
Because I think there's something to be said about, you know, why the opportunities that were missed specifically by not getting these three characters together, and why I think that would have been so important to not necessarily focus so much on new characters. You know, like that, I'm sort of tipping my hat a little bit, but you know, when they decided to create a new trilogy, they clearly made an effort to introduce, you know, newer, younger faces. And I think that that's okay. But if this is the last saga you're ever going to make, then it makes no sense to me not to focus on the three characters that made this saga as important as it was. And they did that very sparingly and very separately, but they didn't do it together. And
Yep.
I think that was a huge miss. I think it was misguided for sure.
I agree. No, I agree. I agree. So how, if we're gonna put a bow on
Yeah.
just this film, just this entry, is this a recommendable film? How did you like this film? In a vacuum, is this a good film? Is it a good Star Wars film? Is it a good entry into the Skywalker saga?
So for me, I will say that when I remember very specifically when I got done seeing this movie for the first time, and you had seen this movie. We both saw this on opening night back in 2015 in December, and we called each other and we talked for at least 45 minutes, and we were up pretty late discussing this movie. And I remember just being super excited, and I was really entertained. I was really pleased that this movie did. Some people think that fan service is a bad thing, and I suppose it can be if it's not done well. But I think this movie did it well, and I appreciate all the fan service, and I appreciate the fact that this was sort of Han Solo's movie. At least that's the way that I interpreted it. I didn't really want a movie specifically for Han Solo. I would have preferred, a joint effort by all the cast members. I certainly would have preferred, as we said, to have Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher all on the screen at the same time. But I really love the fact that Harrison Ford came back. He was really the centerpiece for this movie, in my opinion, especially as it relates to the old generation. And it was fun. It was just fun. It made me feel like I was 8 years old again, and I was in the theaters, and I was excited, and I wanted to see more, and I wasn't disappointed with the output, and I loved it. And I still think to this day, if I'm being honest, not to show too much of my hand, of this sequel trilogy, this is probably the most rewatchable one for me. Like, this is the one that I still go back to, and I still enjoy just as much as I did when I first saw it. I think it's fun. I think it's entertaining. I think it's beautiful. I think it's really, really nice to look at. And it sort of takes me back every time I watch it to when I saw it for the first time, and how excited I was and how impressed I was that they did such a good job with it from top to bottom.
Yeah, I would agree with almost all of that. I think this is the one that there's a ton of fan service here, right? And that's
Mhm.
not a bad thing, right? Especially when you're the fans that they're trying to service, right? Which is what we are. Is it over the top? Is it kind of on the nose? Yeah, it is. But I mean, this is the movie that they were trying to say, okay, we need to make this subset of fans happy with this particular movie, and they did it, right? The subsequent movies, they kind of steered away from that a little bit. Ryan Johnson clearly did, and then even JJ, when he came back to it, was less worried about keeping us happy in the Rise of Skywalker. I never had the problems with this movie that a lot of the critics did in terms of the Mary Sue of Rey. I never had the problems of this being a ripoff, for lack of a better term, of a New Hope. If you look at it through that lens, yes, the comparisons are clearly there. But you know what? That's why I loved it, right? Because I loved A New Hope. And so, yeah, if you're going to remake a movie 32 years later, I'm going to love that one too, right? Just in terms of tonally,
Yeah.
not to mention the fact that this one feels like a Star Wars movie, right? Where the prequel trilogy really didn't. I mean, yes, it was in that universe, but it didn't look like a Star Wars movie. It didn't feel like it, and this one really, really does. It's like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes, right? And that's not that's not a knock at all, right? That's it. It's your favorite pair of shoes, your favorite pair of jeans for a reason, because they fit and they're comfortable, and you know what they are, and you know what you're gonna get, and that's what this movie was. It was. I mean, it's absolutely a recommendable film. Now, I guess the question becomes, if you don't come to this film with all of that background and all of that baggage and all of that knowledge, is it still as good? You know, I don't know, because I can't look at it through the eyes of a newbie, right? I don't know, but I love this film. I love it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good movie. I think it's probably the best one of the series. And I think that it is certainly derivative of the first movie, but it's done that way with intention, and it's done the right way. I think this sort of started a series of movies that tried to do the same thing. Like I can think of Jurassic World, right? Jurassic World was very similar in that it tried to very closely emulate every step of Jurassic Park. And my personal opinion is I didn't like that movie. I thought it was very it was painfully derivative, I guess, is how I would describe it, and it just didn't work for me. But for whatever reason, this one did, and I'm sort of in the same boat as you. Like when I was watching this movie for the first time, I didn't really notice that it was almost beat for beat very similar to the New Hope. But once I found out, or once I sort of agreed with all that criticism, it didn't bother me. It really didn't. Like they did it in the best way possible. They brought back my old favorite characters. They introduced new characters. I think that's another one of the biggest compliments that this movie deserves, is that by the end of this movie, I cared about Rey, I cared about Finn, I cared about Poe. Like I wanted to see where these characters were going. I liked them almost as much as the original characters, and I didn't think that would be humanly possible, to be able to create that much, to be able to put me in a position to really be invested into those characters the same way that I was invested in the older characters. And they did a great job of that in this movie. I think that they're going to fall off significantly in this next movie, and we'll certainly get there as it relates to those characters and how they continue their journeys. But this one was fantastic, and amongst all of the fans, or all of the trolls that are out there, I mean, this movie was the first one to come out when the internet was like in full force, right? I mean, I guess the prequel movies were coming out in the age of the internet, but it's almost not even possible that this movie could have lived up to everybody's expectations, because that in the digital age, like everybody has a voice and everybody has a complaint, and it would have been really difficult to satisfy everybody. But I think it was a resounding success, and I'm really happy that they made it. And by the end of this movie, I was really excited to see what was next, because we knew that Luke Skywalker was next, and it was going to be his movie next, and to try to understand what that was going to be. And that it left me at a spot where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to wait 2 years to figure out what's happening next. It was a long time.
Right. So that kind of leads me to kind of a wrap up, right? So we've been talking. This is clearly going to be the longest of our episodes at this point. We're almost, I don't know, a couple hours in at this point. So just a couple. I got like 3 or 4 more last kind of questions.
Yeah.
Just kind of quick hit questions, right? So, did it live up to the hype? Did this movie live up to the hype from 2015?
For me, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, yes, to answer it quickly, it did.
Yeah, me too. Again, we've talked about there's a lot of fan service, but yes, that's what we wanted. So next question, was the critical backlash, for lack of a better term, that this is just a reboot of A New Hope, is that fair?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, it definitely, you can't argue with you can't argue with the fact that it is very much a repeat of A New Hope. But for me, in my opinion, if it's done right and it's done well, I don't care. I don't care that it's not 100% original. So I don't think it's fair that it's critical. It's a critical response to that. I just, I think it's done well, and it's JJ did a very creative job of sort of retelling a very similar story with newer characters and older characters.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Like I said, I've said a couple times, I didn't even really put two and two together and realize that this was a kind of a beat for beat, shot for shot reboot, right? So that never bothered me.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's a good movie, and it gave me what I wanted, so it didn't bother me. All right, and then the last question is, does this movie, does it whet our appetites for the next movie, the next two movies?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. It absolutely does, right? And I guess we will talk about whether or not our appetite was quenched with the next two movies, but I think it's unequivocal. At the end of this movie, we were ready for more.
Oh, for sure.
When Luke got that lightsaber, we were like, holy shit, give us episode 8 right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't wait. And I was hooked. Everything that JJ did, everything that he put together, everything that he resurrected from the original saga, I couldn't wait to see where this was going to go. And I was so excited to know that there were 2 more movies that were going to come. So yeah, I was definitely ready for more at that point.
Awesome. Well, this has been awesome. This was kind of everything that I wanted it to be when quite frankly, when we started this podcast, right? It was like, let's sit down and let's be geeks and let's talk about the shit that we love. And there's nothing that we love more than Star Wars. And so I think sitting down and having a really kind of extended conversation about this particular movie, this has been awesome. I've loved it. I think it's fair to say that the next time that we get together, we're going to do the next movie in the trilogy, which is The Last Jedi. And if you've seen that movie and you're our age, there's a lot of shit to talk about when it comes to The Last Jedi. I think it's probably fair to say that we're not going to be nearly as complimentary about The Last Jedi as we were about The Force Awakens.
I'd say that's possible. Yeah.
Possible, right? That's not to say that there's not some really great scenes in that, because there is. But I'm really, really looking forward to that conversation.
Well, it's interesting because, JJ sort of kicked this new sequel trilogy off with the intention of bowing out after the first one. And he did. He very much did, which I think we're going to find makes for a very uneven storytelling, result. And, he's going to come back and he's going to end up doing Rise of Skywalker. But, we're going to see some very different tones and themes throughout the next 2 movies that are really going to confuse people. And I wish I could say that it's going to end the way that it started. I don't think that it does. There are going to be, bright spots and not so bright spots, but, we'll get there when we get there, I guess.
Well, we will get there when we get there. Like I said, as I announced in kind of my teaser the last episode, I think this is what you're going to hear Pip and I talk about the next couple times we get together. So we did The Force Awakens. Next time we're going to come to you, we're going to talk about The Last Jedi, and then we're going to end it out with The Rise of Skywalker. So thanks for sticking with us. This has been an awesome experience and an awesome conversation. This has been the 411 from 406. My name is Chewie. I've been joined by my brother Pip. Have a good evening, brother. I appreciate it.
Same here. Love you, man.
All right, love you too.
See you.
Talk to you later.